The endocrine system. Hormones. Hormones are like another control system for the body. They are similar to your nervous system, but it is a lot slower since the message is carried through the blood instead of through nerves. The chemistry of hormones. There are three groups of hormones, and they are amino acid-based hormones, steroids, and eicosanoids. Hormones are released from endocrine glands and travel through the bloodstream to their targets. Amino acid-based hormones. These are water-soluble proteins, and they are the most common hormone. Steroids. Steroids are derived from cholesterol. They are fat-soluble and are mostly sex hormones. Eicosanoids are also called paracrines and are a local hormone. They are local acting hormones, so it affects only a certain area. There are two types of eicosanoids, one being leukotrienes. They are made from lipids, come from white blood cells, and promote inflammations, and prostaglandins. These are made from lipids, raise blood pressure, and help with clotting. Hormone target specificity. A hormone will only stimulate some certain cells. These cells must have receptors for them to be affected by the hormone. Target cells are a cell that responds to a particular hormone. This cell must have receptors for that particular hormone. Receptors are proteins that bind to hormones. They can be inside or outside of the cell. Upregulation occurs when the target cells make more receptors for a hormone. This makes a cell more receptive to the hormone. And downregulation occurs when the target cell produces fewer receptors for a hormone. This makes the cell less receptive to said hormone. The degree to which a target cell is triggered by a hormone depends on the blood levels of the hormone, the number of receptors on a target cell, and the affinity of the bond between the hormone and the receptor. Hormones' effect on receptors. A hormone can affect the amount of receptors for another hormone. For example, progesterone downregulates estrogen while estrogen upregulates progesterone receptors. Mechanisms of hormone action. Hormones can either stimulate or inhibit a cell's activity. Types of effects include they can alter membrane permeability, they can stimulate protein synthesis, they can cause secretory activity, and they can stimulate mitosis. Second messenger systems. There are two second messenger systems, and they are CAMP and PIP. CAMP as a second messenger. CAMP stands for cyclic AMP. The hormone acts as first messenger when it binds to the receptor. This signals a G protein to signal AMP. The G protein acts as a signal transducer to relay the signal to adenylate cyclase. This action will either stimulate or inhibit CAMP production. If it stimulates it, then adenylate cyclase will make CAMP from ATP. CAMP will initiate enzymatic reactions, and CAMP is rapidly broken down by phosphatidylase. The PIP mechanism. The hormone binds to the receptor, phospholipase within the membrane is activated. PIP2 is broken into diglycerol and IP3, and both of these act as second messengers. Diglycerol triggers protein kinesis, and IP3 triggers calcium release from the endoplasmic reticulum. Calcium acts as a third messenger. It affects enzymes, calcium channels, or it will bind calmodulin. Direct gene activation. The hormone goes into the cell. The hormone binds to an intercellular receptor. The hormone receptor complex moves into the nucleus. The hormone binds DNA-associated receptor proteins, which turns on the gene, and then mRNA is produced. Half-life describes how long a hormone remains active in the blood. Onset time is how long it takes to see the effect of the hormone, and duration of action is how long the process started by the hormone lasts. Control of hormone release. The control of hormone release can be done through humoral, neural, or hormonal monitoring. Humoral, levels of ions and nutrients in the blood are monitored, and hormones are released to correct the imbalance, such as insulin and glucagon. Neural, neurons stimulate the release of hormones, as with norepinephrine and epinephrine. Hormonal, hormones from one endocrine gland stimulate the release of hormones from another gland, such as when the pituitary gland releases hormones to stimulate the gonadal gland. These are mostly controlled by a negative feedback loop. Nervous system modulation. The nervous system can override some hormonal controls such as glucose levels in your body.
Major endocrine organs. What are the major organs of the endocrine system? You have the pituitary, the thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, adrenal gland, pancreas, gonads, and pineal gland, and the last, you have the thymus. Now with the pituitary, you have the infundibulum, which is the stalk that connects the pituitary to the thalamus. There are two lobes. You have the anterior lobe, which consists of glandular tissue and produces hormones, and the posterior lobe, which stores the hormones made in the hypothalamus. Now, in order for the anterior lobe and the posterior lobe to communicate, they have to talk to each other through the infundibulum. The Pituitary-Hypothalamic Relationship. The hypothalamic hypophyseal tract is an axon connection that connects the posterior pituitary gland to the hypothalamus. The hypophyseal portal system is a bundle of blood vessels that connects the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary. Adenohypophyseal hormones. Within the adenohypophyseal hormones, you have the growth hormones, which targets general body cells, bone, and muscle. Now that ends up causing growth of bones and muscle. For clinical problems, you have gigantism, which is hypersecretion of the growth hormone, meaning that there's too much. You have acromegaly, which is adult hyposecretion of the growth hormone. With pituitary dwarfism, you have hyposecretions of growth hormone, but this is only in a child. We also have prolactin, which targets your breasts and then causes milk production. We have the thyroid stimulating hormone, which is abbreviation as in TSH, which targets follicular cells of the thyroid gland and causes production of the thyroid hormone, T3 and T4. Adenohypophyseal hormones. You have the adrenocorticotropic hormone, which is ACTH, that targets the adrenal cortex, causing production of cortisol. You also have the follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, FSH and LH, which targets the gonads and causes production of reproductive organs. All six of these hormones, GH, TSH, ACTH, PRL, FSH, and LH, are stored in the adenohypophysis of the pituitary gland, also known as the anterior pituitary. Neurohypophyseal hormones, aka pituitary. You have oxytocin, which targets the breast and the uterus, causing labor contractions in the uterus and milk letdown in the breast. The antidiuretic hormone, which is ADH, targets the kidneys and causes an uptake in H2O. Both oxytocin and ADH are stored in the neurohypophyseal, also known as the posterior pituitary. Thyroid gland. Structures of the thyroid gland include the right and left lobes, the isthmus, which connects the right and left lobes, the follicles, which are the functional units of the thyroid gland, and the parafollicular cells. Now, with the follicles, you have subunits. That's the thyroid globulin, which is part of the colloid, and it's the precursor to the thyroid hormone. And the thyroid hormone is the body's major metabolic hormone. As for parafollicular cells, they produce calcitonin. Thyroid gland hormones. You have the thyroid hormone, also known as T3 and T4, which targets general body cells, which then causes a raise in basal metabolic rate. For calcitonin, that targets the kidneys and the bone, and that causes a decrease in calcium levels. For clinical problems, you have hypothyroidism, which is too little thyroid hormone, and then you have cretinism in infants, which causes lethargic and mental development issues. Myxedema in adults is low metabolic rate, cold, and constipated. You also have goiter, which is the thyroid gland grows and makes a big lump in your neck. Hyperthyroidism, aka Graves' disease, is too much thyroid hormone, sweating, eyeball protrusion as well. Parathyroid gland. Structures of the parathyroid gland include chief cells, oxyphil cells, and then it also contains the parathyroid hormone. As for the chief cells, they secrete parathyroid hormone. and the oxyphil cells, they have an unknown function. For parathyroid hormone, it targets the kidneys and increases reabsorption of calcium. Here you have an outline of the pituitary gland. Now on the left, you have oxytocin and ADH. And it shows that with oxytocin, it targets the breast, which causes milk letdown, and then the uterus causes labor contractions. As for ADH, it gives you a simplified overview that it targets the kidneys and raises H2O intake. Now, for growth hormone, as we discussed earlier, it targets GBC and causes growth in bone and muscle. TSH targets follicular cells of the thyroid gland and then causes production of thyroid hormone. ACTH targets the cortex, which causes production of cortisol. And then within the medulla, you also produce epinephrine, which causes the flight response. Now, FSH targets the gonads and then causes a production of reproductive hormones. Now, as for the adrenal cortex, it produces aldosterone and then targets the kidneys, which raises an intake of Na. Now, the thyroid gland contains parafollicular cells which produce calcitonin, and when calcitonin targets osteoblasts, it causes an uptake in bone production. Now, when calcitonin targets osteoclasts, it's a decrease in bone resorption. The parathyroid gland produces PTH, which targets osteoclasts, and then causes an increase in bone resorption. Now, the PTH and the calcitonin are antagonists.
The adrenal glands have several different layers. They have the zona reticularis, which is the inner layer of the cortex, followed by the zona fasciculata, which is the middle layer of the cortex, and the zona glomerulosa, which is the outer layer. Corticosteroids, mineralcorticoids. Mineralcorticoids regulate electrolytes. An example of this is aldosterone, which causes the reabsorption of sodium, and water follows it. This occurs when sodium levels are low and potassium levels are high. Aldosterone is inhibited by high blood pressure and high blood volume. Aldosteronism is the overproduction of aldosterone, which can cause high blood pressure, poor vision, and headaches. This is regulated by the Renin-Angiotensin Mechanism. In the Renin-Angiotensin Mechanism, the liver releases angiotensinogen, and then the kidney releases renin. The renin and the angiotensinogen form angiotensin 1. The lungs then release ACE. ACE and angiotensin 1 form angiotensin 2, and the angiotensin 2 causes the production of aldosterone in the adrenal glands. Glucocorticoids. These target general body cells and promote healing. An example of this is cortisol, which increases the conversion of lipids and proteins to glucose. Corticotrophin-releasing hormones causes the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone, which stimulates the release of cortisol. Cushing's syndrome is caused by the overproduction of cortisol, which can cause weight gain around the midsection, fatty deposits around face and upper back, and high blood pressure. Addison's disease is caused when the adrenal glands don't produce enough hormones. This can cause fatigue, nausea, darkening of skin, and dizziness upon standing. The adrenal medulla produces epinephrine and norepinephrine. This is your fight or flight response. This causes an increased heart rate and blood pressure. It dilates the bronchioles, reduces speed of digestion, and increases body metabolic rate. The pancreas has an exocrine and an endocrine portion. The exocrine portion contains acinar cells, which produce digestive secretions. The islets of Langerhans are the endocrine portions, which produce hormones. Alpha cells make glucagon, beta cells make insulin, and delta cells make somatostatin. Glucagon causes blood sugar levels to rise via gluconeogenesis, which is making new glucose. Somatostatin shuts down the production of pancreatic juices. Insulin causes glyconeogenesis, which is the formation of glycogen from sugar, glycolysis, which is the burning of sugar to make ATP, lipogenesis, which is the formation of fats, and it's released as a result of high blood sugar levels. Diabetes mellitus is losing glucose through urination. Polyuria is abnormally frequent urination. Polydipsia is abnormal thirst. Polyphagia is abnormal hunger.
Child cases of diabetes mellitus are usually insulin dependent, and this is called type 1. In adults, it's called type 2, and these are non-insulin dependent. This is generally lifestyle oriented. Gonads. The ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone, and the testes produce testosterone. Pineal gland produces melatonin, which regulates the sleep-wake cycle. The thymus produces thymosin. Thymosin promotes the maturation of T cells. It also produces thymopoietin, which allows the thymus to differentiate between lymphocytes. The kidneys produce erythropoietin, which makes red blood cells. In the skin, cholecalciferol causes the absorption of vitamin D in the digestive tract.